So I call this meeting to order. So welcome to meeting number 56 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. A reminder that forget about the reminder about in-camera meetings. Pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, November 1st, 2022, the committee commenced consideration of the annual report 2021-22 of the Office of the Correctional Investigator of Canada. With us today in person, we have from the Office of the Correctional Investigator of Canada, we have Dr. Ivan Zinger, Correctional Investigator of Canada, and Hazel Miron, Senior Investigator. Welcome to you both. As requested by Dr. Zinger, we are allocating 20 minutes for his opening statement, or for the group opening statement. And with that, I now invite Dr. Zinger to make his opening statement.
Merci infiniment, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and all members of the committee. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. I'm here with Hazel Miron, who is one of my senior investigators, who is also a champion within my office on matters relating to Indigenous peoples. This is a woman with a great deal of experience. I hope that if you do have questions relating to Indigenous matters, that she will be able to assist us in better understanding the issues that are active at Correctional Services Canada. What I would propose today is to simply provide content from my annual report. I've provided 2 PowerPoint presentations to you. I will simply provide the content of the annual report in its major outlines and then move to my second presentation, which has to do with the prisoner profiles for federal prisoners, federal inmates. I think that'll give you a good context. And then, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to give me 2 hours this morning. I'll admit that historically, correctional questions have not been a major priority, and when they have attracted attention, it's often been for the wrong reasons. So I'd like to thank you for that. Our annual report was tabled early November 2022, and it provided a number of updates on important concerns and concerns for our office and important matters in general. As to the issues that are raised in the update, the use of dry cells, the use of the mother-child program, the use of escorts, security escorts, vehicles, and structured intervention units. We had 3 other investigations, one on Indigenous people, one on Black individuals, and also restrictive practices within federally regulated institutions. Let me now move to the presentation on profile. I'll spend a good 15 minutes on that before moving to question period. Once again, thank you. For those of you who have a copy of my presentation, I'll start with slide 2.
Give you a bit of a context of the profile of the offender population in federal corrections. First, there's some things that many of you may not be aware of, and certainly some Canadians are unaware of some of the facts regarding federal corrections. The first thing is that generally around the world, correction is big business. And I would tell you that in Canada is very much so. We spend an inordinate amount on federal corrections compared to other jurisdictions. Correctional Service of Canada has a budget of close to $3 billion to manage about 12,500 incarcerated persons, as well as about 9,000 individuals that are serving the remaining of their federal sentences in the community. It has approximately 19,000 employees. And if you look at why is it so inordinate amount of money, the ratio between staff and prisoners in federal correction is probably the highest one in the world, with a ratio of 1.2 staff per prisoner. That is extraordinary by any standard. And if it's not the very highest, it's certainly at the very top. So I have no problem about spending a great deal of money in federal correction. But if we do spend that kind of money, we should expect outstanding outcomes and performances in every single area of correctional endeavor. So in terms of the cost per incarcerated population, if you take the $3 billion and if you take away 6% of that budget to look after the community corrections component, you end up with an average cost, all inclusive, overheads included, of about $225,000 per year per individual. The official cost, which is in corporate documents, talk about $126,000, but that doesn't cover the overall cost, like national headquarters, regional headquarters, etc. So the real cost is very, very high. I also want to point out that currently the service is operating about 43 penitentiaries, but many of them have vacancy in those penitentiaries. At the moment, there are over 4,000 empty cells across Canada. That represent an average, if the average of a penitentiary in Canada is about 500 incarcerated person per institution, that means that it's about 8 empty penitentiary. And I have said it before, and I even mentioned it to the minister. It is maybe time to think about rationalizing a little bit how we those penitentiaries. Three of those are over 100 years old, and the average age of our penitentiary in Canada is anywhere between 45 and 50 years old. Very old infrastructure where it's very difficult to sustain humane custody as well as effective corrections, meaning good rehabilitation environment. With respect to the incarceration rate, I have to tell you that over the pandemic, the federal correctional system saw about a loss of about 10% of its in-custody resident. So we shrunk over COVID by about 10%. And this was due primarily because the courts weren't processing during COVID cases as quickly as they should. There was no real attempt to trying to empty our penitentiaries to manage the various waves of outbreaks. At the provincial level, they did better, much better, and they were proactive. And they were so because in the federal system, we have single cell accommodation. It's not surprising with all that empty space. So Correctional Service of Canada, the way they managed the actual outbreak was to isolate people in their cells. That was their strategy. And people spend inordinate amount of time in their cells during COVID, and they still do because of some systemic issues that are residual from those days. At the provincial level, they have dormitories, they have overcrowding, they have double double bunking, which means 2 people in a cell that was designed for 1. They even have triple bunking. So there was a real proactive effort to reduce the number of provincial incarcerated individuals. And the jurisdictions were able to reduce the provincial prison population by anywhere between 25 upwards to 50%. And I say this because despite those huge reduction, unheard of in Canadian history in terms of emptying our penitentiary, crime rates did not go up. So I know you're facing a lot of pressures around, for example, things like bail. The reduction of those provincial facilities were in large due by reviewing bail decisions and releasing people that normally would have remained in jail. So just as policymakers and legislature, think about that. We reduce the prison population and crime doesn't go up. Of course, there are some egregious cases, and those need to be subject to significant tightening and reforms. But let's keep that in mind. Let's have a balanced view of these things. So let me talk to you a little bit about the profile of the incarcerated persons in federal corrections. I'm going to jump to, if you're following, to slide number 8. But let me make a few more little comments first. Why is the profile so important? Because the profile can be used to make decisions on approaches to federal corrections. You probably heard, a famous saying that you can tell a lot by, in terms of a society, by entering its prisons. So it can tell you a lot about the degree of civility or, the commitment to social justice or human rights by entering prisons in any society. So I always wonder, since I started my career, so what would it be to enter a Canadian penitentiary? What would you see? And I hope that all of you have taken the time, because the legislation provides you with the authority to visit penitentiaries. So this saying was first picked up by, or I guess quoted by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It was repeated by Winston Churchill, and then later on even by Nelson Mandela. But the focus has always been on these things about the treatment of prisoners, how they're treated. That sort of tells you a lot about a society. But I think we have to go beyond that, and we have to ask ourselves, who are the men and women in our penitentiaries? Are they a sort of a random cross-section of the Canadian society, or are they particular components of that of our society? So the profile can be used and have been used, for example, by the Harper government during its 10-year presence in government to justify a tough-on-crime agenda. So they use the profile to sort of say, look at the profile. We're dealing with dangerous people, which require mandatory minimum sentences, require longer sentences, harsher conditions of confinement, fewer opportunities for parole. So that has been the approach taken by using the profile to substantiate that. My argument is that that profile can be used, if you want, as a barometer to gauge the success and failures of our broad Canadian policies. And it can be used to sort of detect whether our policies are anchored in good human rights principles and also fair, just, and compliant with human rights. And it can be used certainly to focus more on helping those that are incarcerated. So let me jump in and give you the sort of the overview of that profile. It's clear to me that the prevalence and all the data suggest the prevalence of those who are mentally ill in prison is extraordinarily high. So those in prisons have significant mental health issues. And if you look at the sort of the prevalence data, it shows that nearly 80% of all men and women incarcerated have a current mental disorder. That's a very broad definition of mental health, because it includes things like addiction issues and personality disorder. But even if you narrow it down, based on CSC data upon admission, that about 30% of the inmate population, when they come into the federal system, require psychological or psychiatric services. There's also an inordinate amount of psychotropic drugs being dispensed every day, 4 times higher than what is being done in Canadian society at large. We know from CSC research that about a third meet the diagnosis of PTSD when it comes to women. And we just have a lack of data for men, but I'm suspecting that it's also extremely high. We also know that the incidence of self-injuries is extraordinarily high, as well as keeps increasing over the last decade. One thing that is less known is that our prison population also have significant cognitive deficits. And these takes the form of intellectual impairment, brain injury, fetal alcohol syndromes, learning disabilities, ADHD, and all that makes it much more difficult for the Correctional Service of Canada to implement programming that is effective, because these things are lifetime issues. They're not things that you can just give a pill and it will resolve it. Just on some of those, the learning disabilities for me is really problematic, because the service does not do anything to address learning disability. It doesn't assess it. It doesn't have. It's ill-equipped to deal with it. It doesn't have specialized teachers, and it's just a shame. So let me move on because I want to make sure I finish this, to the next slide. I'm at slide 9. Indigenous self-government. As you know, for the last 3 decades, the percentage of Indigenous in federal corrections keep going up and up and up and up. It is now at 32% of the prison population is of Indigenous ancestry. And for women, the situation is worse. It is now 50%. And Indigenous people don't fare well in prison. So this is drawn from my last annual report. The latest data that we have, again, shows that Indigenous prisoners compared to non-Indigenous prisoners have a higher rate of custody versus community supervision. They're more likely to be involved in use of force. They're overrepresented in maximum security institution, overrepresented in solitary confinement or the new structured intervention units, more likely to be affiliated with security threats or gangs, more likely to self-injure, more likely to attempt suicide, overrepresented in prison suicide for the last fiscal year, serve a higher proportion of their sentence compared to non-Indigenous, have a higher recidivism rate, and a higher rate of parole suspension or revocation. So they don't fare well. And let me tell you that all these outcomes, Correctional Service of Canada has some leverage on it. So when correction tells me, Ivan, we have no control who comes into our penitentiaries, and that's correct, but they do have leverage on correctional outcome. For Black Canadian is the same thing, and we've covered as well in our last
Heads up, Doctor. 2 minutes, please.
Okay. Same thing. With respect to and the correctional outcome as poor. With respect to the drug strategy, 75% of our prison population have a history of substance abuse. Education, the average educational achievement of our prisoner coming into the system is a grade 8 education. They also, most of them, over 60% of them, at the time of the index offense were unemployed, and they have very poor vocational skills. Finally, the last slide. Arm reductions, we do know that there is much higher rate of HIV as well as hepatitis C, although the hepatitis C is getting under control with new medication. Interestingly, despite the fact that we have some attempt at arm reduction, we have about 25% of our incarcerated individuals that are now on methadone or Suboxone. As for women, it's one of the fastest growing segment of the inmate population, and we have to remember that the great majority of them reported sexual, psychological, or physical abuse, and there's some question that needs to be. All of them should be incarcerated the way they are. Aging is also another issue. It's been a growing segment of the inmate population. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was about 15% were aged 50 or over. Now we're looking at 26%. And we did some systemic investigation on this, and we found an inordinate amount of people with dementia, Alzheimer, that are palliative, terminally ill, great mobility issue, hooked up on oxygen tanks, bedridden, and in my view, these individuals have no place in penitentiaries. So thank you very much, and hopefully this will give you good background.
Well, thank you for that excellent presentation. We will start our questioning with the first round. We will go to Ms. Dancho for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Zinger and Ms. Marone, for being here with us today. And thank you very much for your hard work in advocating and providing oversight of our correctional facilities, and certainly advocating for dignity for all those that are in our corrections facilities. I recently traveled to Stony Mountain Penitentiary outside of my community. I have a number of corrections officers who are employed there. It's my second journey to visit the penitentiary and really learn more about many of the issues that you've brought up today, and certainly some of the issues that our corrections officers are facing. And an issue that they brought up twice to me in the last 3 years that I have visited was the prison needle exchange program. So I'd appreciate your perspective on this and to address a number of the concerns that have been raised to me. And so for those who aren't aware, of course you are, but the prison needle exchange is a program where needle kits are provided to inmates that are injecting these illegal drugs that are being smuggled in to the benefit of criminal organizations and gangs in Canada. And so one of the concerns raised by the corrections officers certainly is for their own safety. Of course, a needle is sort of like a tiny knife that could be used to do a number of harmful things to other inmates and certainly to corrections officers. And so there is, I would describe what I've heard as is considerable fear from corrections officers at Stony Mountain Penitentiary that this prison needle exchange is coming, and concerns for their own safety and also the safety of other inmates. Can you respond to that in short form?
Yes, and we've actually documented in this annual report some of the concerns. Absolutely, there is a lot of fear out there. This is an issue that my office raised back in terms of introducing it into penitentiary back in 2005. And it, under the pressure of litigation, Canada eventually introduce it in penitentiaries. The whole idea is to prevent harm, is We know that.
And sorry, just to confirm, to prevent harm from spread of HIV and hepatitis and things like that from an inmate using a makeshift needle or a needle that they were able to smuggle in, if they share that needle, they could be passing various diseases. Is that what you're referring to in terms of harm reduction? Okay.
Yeah, harm reduction, absolutely. You're quite correct. And the countries that have introduced it have shown great deal of success in reducing the spread of infectious diseases, but also have witnessed, and this is what's most important, but a hard one to sell to correctional staff, is that actually made the prison a safer place for correctional staff.
Thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind tabling that data specifically to the committee so we can review it, that would be greatly beneficial to our work here. I do have limited time, so I did want to, but I think that that's an important piece of evidence that we should be reviewing. But I do appreciate the laudable goals that you provide to the committee just now, but there is concerns also from inmates themselves. I'm sure you're very familiar with the Edmonton Women's Institution, who wrote on their own accord, they wrote a letter petitioning against this program coming to their prison. And in particular, they said, for the record, there is no such thing as safe injection. This is, again, their words. There's no such thing as safe injection in prison. We need to heal. Don't let the federal government introduce this program. We matter. We are people. We don't need needles. We need staff to help us safely reintegrate. And they go on to say a number of things, and they have considerable fear, and there's a number of names on this petition. And so this is from a women's prison, and I'm just wondering, how do you rectify the fear and the advocacy from the women themselves and introducing this program that they don't want?
Yeah, so again, I have to admit that there's absolutely some challenges in terms of introducing needle exchange program into federal corrections. So much so that my annual report says that right now the program is only in name because it involves so few inmates that because the Correctional Service Canada has made it so hard to actually participate in the program. And it causes, because of that, it actually causes more harm and more risk to correctional officers because now the few inmates that do have those kits are now sort of renting it to others or being bullied to get those needles that can be now clean, hopefully. So it is something that you need to do a lot more work with respect to appeasing the culture within correctional officers, as well as the prisoners themselves, to demonstrate the validity and the safety of it. They are absolutely, at least which is a half measure. It's not ideal, but there are other programs, like, for example, the safe injection site, the pilot that has been taken, that is showing great deal of promises, but it's still not being rolled out quickly enough. It's only in one penitentiary at Drumheller. The union and correctional officers are more at ease with that program, but unfortunately that program only works between, during the daytime when healthcare is open and can supervise the safe injections.
I'm just out of time, so I'll just thank you for your remarks. I appreciate your perspective very much, and I just, moving forward, I just urge you to ensure you're considering in a fulsome way the protections of our hardworking corrections officers and also the inmates themselves, in particular the women who have raised significant fear and concerns of this program coming to their penitentiary. So I thank you very much. Thank you.
The danger is that if you don't have it, there will be dirty needles everywhere, and when correctional officers search people, they can prick themselves, and that's where the risk is. And that's what previous other jurisdictions have demonstrated, that you can reduce that risk of dirty needles being laying around and officers touching them accidentally when they conduct searches. And this is what I'm hoping that the unions as well as correctional officers will realize.
Thank you for your insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. We go now to Ms. Damoff. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. And Dr. Zayer, thank you. and your whole team, Ms. Miron, for your dedicated work and for many years and helpful insight as to what's going on in our correctional institutions. I want to ask you about the Mother-Child program. I visited the Mother-Child program at Grand Valley last year. The Library of Parliament did an outstanding report. I asked them to on the Mother-Child program, and some of the information in that was actually quite shocking. In 2011, so that I'm sure it's worse today than it was in 2011, StatsCan said that 48% of children residing in foster care were Indigenous, and the majority of those children have incarcerated mothers. In that same year, no Indigenous mothers were approved for the Mother-Child program in federal prisons, and to this day, this program continues to be underused in Corrections Canada. So for those that don't know, this program not only connects mums to newborn infants, but also the mums that I saw were maintaining contact with older children through the program. One of the challenges, though, one of the mums I met was in Kitchener at Grand Valley, and her children were in Flin Flon. So the ability for them to actually see each other was close to zero. One of your recommendations states that CSC should review the program requirements and eligibility requirements, because those were changed during the Harper years and made it much more difficult for Indigenous women to participate. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the benefits of the program and what CSC should do to allow more women to participate.
Yeah, so we actually raised this issue many years ago. And certainly we did when there were some, political decisions to try to restrict that access to those programs. And we included in this year, and basically thanks to you, because we know there was a Library of Parliament research that was conducted on this, and that was consistent with our own findings, so we took the time to reflect on it. What we found is certainly things like it's very difficult. The service has a poor ability to track the number of participants, but the data we have shows an extremely low participation rate. The criteria are, as you said, too restrictive and discriminatory in nature when it comes to Indigenous women. There are inconsistency across the country, across the 5 different regional facilities for women. And also we know that there is very little that has been done in terms of the impact upon the children that are part of those programs. So maybe I'll, my view is that the program now as it's set up is limited to minimum security institutions where there's very few Indigenous women who actually make it to minimum. The bulk of them are in maximum security or in medium security. In maximum security, actually, in my annual report, this one, it states that 60% of those who are in the secure units, which are the maximum security for women, are Indigenous. So it prevents mothers from Indigenous ancestry to have access to the program. And that's why we think that there's a need to review the program. I'm going to turn it just to Hazel, if she may, just to talk a little bit about from her perspective, because she has an awful lot of experience with women institution.
Good morning, everyone. Just to touch on your question, Pam. According to in looking at the criteria for accessing this program, it's very restrictive for Indigenous women. There's no cultural, there's nothing cultural about the criteria, and it's almost a barrier for them to access this program. Family is very important for Indigenous people, so I think it's a program that needs to be encouraged, and the criteria needs to be overhauled to include the cultural perspective. And I've been to Buffalo Sage in Edmonton and have traveled across Canada to the various institutions and healing lodges and have witnessed mothers with their babies at Buffalo Sage and how the effect and the impact that this has on the other women there was astounding.
I only have 30 seconds left. Does this have better incomes for the women who are in prison? It's not just a nice thing to do for them. And my understanding is that actually these women end up with better outcomes as well.
Yes, they have better outcomes because they're not always worried about their family. They see their child and they want to do more for themselves because they start building that mother-child connection, right? And they want to do more for their children. And so in that sense, to me, it's really effective. But they need to get the criteria needs to be revamped and has to take into consideration the cultural aspects of this access.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moff. C'est maintenant Madame Michaud. 6 minutes.
Madame Michaud, you have the floor. 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your attendance. It's really quite appreciated, and I thank you for your rigorous work. I have some questions as to your office's authority. In your report, you expressed some frustration as to the actions taken by Correctional Services Canada based on your recommendations. It seems to be something that's long-standing or ongoing. It seems as though the recommendations that you issue are almost copy-pasted from one year to the next. Changes don't actually take place. And some say, oh, it might be because there's a lack of means or there's a lack of resources, personnel. Maybe that's why Correctional Services Canada is not implementing these recommendations that you issue. But in your profile that you explained at the beginning of your presentation, you said that the ratio is the highest in the world, that there's almost a $3 billion budget for correctional services. So we could perhaps put those ideas aside. In your opinion, why is it that Correctional Services Canada does not implement your recommendations year after year? That's a very good question, and it's something that concerns me a great deal. When it comes to my office's effectiveness, we only really have the power to recommend certain things. It's not binding on correctional services, the government, nor the minister, and that is the approach that is appropriate. As to effectiveness, out in the field when investigators meet with the various directors or wardens of the various institutions, the success rate is quite high. We're able to address issues with the directors of these institutions. And over the years, I can say that I have a great deal of respect for those people that are holding these important positions. They're very strong, they're very professional, and that all works great. The problem is when I make more systemic type recommendations in my annual report, for instance, something that is more directed to the Commissioner for Correctional Services or the Minister or the Government of Canada. In those cases, it's clear to me that our rate of effectiveness drops significantly. What I say in my report is that when Correctional Services says no, ignores our recommendations, it does so at its own risk, if you will, because in many cases, what we do is we document in a very rigorous way a number of concerns and issues raised, and that is used by lawyers in court. And in fact, only 2 weeks ago, 2 Supreme Court decisions were rendered rejecting minimum sentences, and they based that on 3 reports from my office that are cited in these Supreme Court decisions. The same can be said with respect to dry cells. That the government actually now has to change the law because of court cases, and we had actually suggested that over 5 years ago. As to preventive detention, the same thing could be said. Court proceedings and class action lawsuits also cite the work of our office at length. The same thing can be said with respect to needle exchanges. We've also raised transgender issues and the issues in accommodating people based on their identity or sexual expression. So you would say it's still positive. My next question would be, should the office have more power? Actually, based on what you're saying, I feel like you're saying that you're relatively satisfied with the power to recommend. And you say that when you go there out in the field, there are a number of things that might not actually appear in the report because you're actually addressing these issues with these wardens and directors. There are some things that move ahead even without the involvement of Correctional Services Canada. So it's rather positive. So thank you for that information. You address the issue of dry cells. There's an expression in French, cellules nues, or naked cells. Is that the same thing as dry cells? Dry cells are for when somebody's suspected of having ingested or hidden drugs on their body, within their body, and that they wait until these things are evacuated, and that's why they're called dry. You recommend nothing beyond 72 hours for a dry cell. I went to visit Port-Cartier. That was my first visit of one of these correctional institutions. I was with Ms. Damos, and we saw what that looked like. A few days prior, there was a ministerial directive from Minister Mendicino that was issued regarding these cells. What happens when there's a directive of the sort that's issued? Does Correctional Service has no choice but to implement them? Is there no date? There was no date as to an implementation time frame. Does that help you in your work? How does that work when the minister intervenes on some of your recommendations, for one? Well, actually, in this case, it's actually a decision rendered by the court. The government had to reply to that within a time frame, and clearly the minister took a proactive position. In anticipation of new directives or new legislation being implemented to address the problem. What is disappointing to me to some degree, and now it's been it's the second time, I think, there have been mandate letters that have been issued by the Prime Minister to the Ministers of Public Safety and from the Public Safety Minister to the Commissioner for Correctional Services. The last letter is excellent, really. The content is great because it really reflects all of the concerns that our offices have documented for many years. The problem with these letters, I mean, despite the fact that the content is great, as I said, the problem is that the letter does not contain any concrete timeline nor concrete action. And that's the problem with these letters, is that it's difficult to make someone accountable if there's no deadline for a deliverable, if you will, a timeline. Thank you, sir. If I had a recommendation in support of my office, would be to add an action plan that would be approved by Correctional Services to demonstrate in a concrete way how all of these things will be improved, because otherwise we end up 4 years later with very little progress. Thank you, sir.
We go now to Mr. McGregor. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome, Dr. Zinger, and it's great to see both of you here. For quite a while, our committee has really been sidelined with Bill C-21, and I think this is an important reminder of just how big the public safety portfolio is and how important your work is. So I'm glad that we're doing this important change topic. I want to talk about, reducing harms in the context of drug use. I come from British Columbia, which in many ways is the epicenter of the opioids crisis. And in my community in the Cowichan Valley, we have a really big problem. And I have spoken with people who are on the front lines of this crisis. And, my conservative friends like to underline the importance of treatment. And I agree with them, but my counter to that is that you can't treat a dead person. And right now, we have got so many people who are suffering from trauma, and they are going out and playing Russian roulette every time they buy street drugs because of the levels of fentanyl. And many of them are just not ready for treatment. There's a staged process for someone to be successful at treatment. And your prisoner profile, you highlight the number of people who have substance use issues, the mental health crisis. I guess my first question to you is, when it comes to, reducing harm in our prisons, can you just put that in the context of what the overdose rate is like in our prisons, and the fact that inmates, many who do have substance use issues, they are going to find a way to use drugs. That's just a fact. And drugs will make their way in prisons. I have talked with staff at the Kent Institution, at the Mountain Institution. Drugs will find their way into the prisons. And by reducing harms, just trying to keep these prisoners alive so that they can maybe one day successfully get into a program. I just would like to hear more context from you on this really big issue.
Well, thank you. This is something that certainly plagues the Correctional Service of Canada, and I'm very preoccupied by it. In order to be effective, you have to have a wide spectrum of initiatives to trying to reduce the drugs coming into the penitentiaries as well as the demand. So we called interdiction all the measures that have been applied to trying to prevent drugs from coming in. And then you also have, on top of that, you have, if you're balancing your approach, you have outstanding programming in terms of reducing addiction, and then you have you proactive on the arm reduction as well. So you have to have all this. What we see with the Corrections Service of Canada is that they are still focused basically on a zero tolerance approach to drugs, and that's what we have written in my annual report. The policy on the strategy of the service dates back in 2007, which is extraordinary. It is so out of date, and it doesn't even reflect what some of the positive steps that the services has taken. So we spend an inordinate amount on interdiction. It's extraordinary how much, and it doesn't work. Interdiction itself, the zero tolerance approach, just doesn't work. It doesn't work in our society. It doesn't work among countries, and it just doesn't work in the penitentiaries. There are some real issues and new issues, like, for example, the issue around drones to trying to prevent drugs from coming in. But drugs will always come in. So that's why you have to have outstanding ability to reduce the demand. And the only way you can do that is by having very accessible, very top-of-the-line addiction program. And the service doesn't have that anymore. They used to have core programming that specifically targeted addiction. Now it's been wrapped up with their new integrated model where you can treat anything, any sort of whether it's family violence, anger management, addiction, everything is in one single program, and that's just not appropriate. It's imperative, given the substance abuse, which sometimes can be years of abuse. You need to have one-on-one, you have to have professional counseling, you have to have group, you have to have all sorts of measures in place. Some jurisdictions have even introduced drug-free prison where people commit to trying to help themselves. There's all sorts of ways you can do for that. On the harm reduction side, the harm reduction, Canada is at the forefront on paper with prison needle exchange. But, last fiscal year, there were 46, well, actually, when we did our annual report, we did a snapshot, there were only 46 people involved into prison needle exchange. And you have 3,000 that are on methadone and Suboxone. So they're struggling with addiction issues. And as I say, it's the most common area of concern. So it just doesn't work. There are only one pilot program, which is on the safe injection site at Drumheller. So kudos for the service for trying, but it's just when it comes to the implementation, there are many barriers, and somebody mentioned some of those barriers are real. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of, but we have to change the approach. The approach is unbalanced and ineffectual, and it's not serving anybody. Our prisons remain sieves, I'm sorry to tell you, when it comes to the introduction of drugs. And it's not by pouring hundreds of millions of dollars to trying to make them airtight that you're actually going to actually succeed. So we got to take it a different approach.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll go now to our second round of questions. We'll start with Mr. Shipley. Mr. Shipley, please go ahead. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here today, and thank you for your report. I'm going to probably carry on a little bit where Mr. McGregor left off there, because I just find that a little fascinating and a little alarming to know. I toured a federal penitentiary a long time ago. I haven't spent a lot of time in them since, thankfully, right? So I do have some questions, though. And the first one's going to be very basic. Is tobacco legal? Can you smoke tobacco in a federal penitentiary?
The answer is no. So tobacco is not. It's considered contraband, and you can actually get punished. Tobacco, which is obviously a legal substance in Canadian society, when introduced in penitentiaries, a pouch of tobacco can go as high as $800 for a pouch of tobacco under the sort of underground market.
I have very limited time, so sorry to interrupt. Now, I'm glad I actually asked that, because that wasn't the answer I was expecting. I thought it was. So my next question was going to be, is marijuana legal? Because it's now a legal product, so obviously that's not legal in penitentiaries either. So what I'm finding a little bit hard to get my head around is just we have a stack here of releases from the Correctional Services Canada. This is just from January. Of all the contraband that has been seized, some going in, which is good work, obviously, but much of it is while it's in there. And one of these seizures even had 10 cell phones and 13 chargers. This was in a long list of, there's 45 grams of THC, 1.9 grams of amphetamines. I'm not going to read it all. But it just mind-boggled me how much is getting in there. You mentioned in your last comment that federal penitentiaries, and to quote you, are a sieve for drugs getting in there. You also mentioned at the beginning that our staff-to-prisoner ratio is, I don't think you used the word excellent, but it's very good, and we're spending a lot of money. So what can we do to try and prevent some of these items from getting in there in the first place?
We have to look beyond the drug trade and look at conditions of confinement in general. if you're going to actually impact on this. So part of the problem is, if you had programming that was meaningful and addressed substance abuse issues and reduced some of the demand, that would be very helpful. But also, if you had meaningful vocational training, if you had good food so that you don't have to use the little resources, financial resources you have to complement your diet, if you had inmate pay that was higher, because inmate pay was set back in 1981 at $6.90, and only very few of them per day.
Doctor, I need to interrupt because you're mentioning all things kind of internal. Is there nothing we could do external as a correctional service, as a government, to keep it out? You're mentioning all things that would be programs to help them want it less, and I understand that. Is there nothing we can do to keep it from entering?
What I can tell you is that we spend an inordinate amount of money per prisoner per year. Could that money be better used to try to address substance abuse in the community? That would be one way of dealing with it. So if you are more proactive in the community to address chronic addiction issues, which is often used to manage mental health problems. So if you have better mental health problems, better addiction services and treatment available in the community, that would reduce
getting off it. Can't we do anything where we're checking everybody coming in? I'm trying to simplify this a little bit for me and for people watching. Can we not just be checking every parcel that comes in, every person that comes in? I mean, it is a confined area, and I'm not trying to make this a little issue, because it's not. I'm trying to get my own mind, and I'm sure other people are trying to figure out how this gets in there. All the things you're mentioning are trying to get people not to want it anymore or reduce it. I agree with you. But I'm talking about the one step of reducing it from going in. Is there no way, you've been around these facilities, you've studied them, you've talked to the workers there, is there any other ways we're not implementing to try and keep this contraband of all sorts out of the facilities?
Many countries have tried, and it's virtually impossible unless you shut down completely an institution. Human ingenuity, greed will always get you a step ahead. I think that question you can certainly ask to the Commissioner of Corrections. She may have some views on this. But when I look, I visited I visited prison all the way around the world. The latest one, a week ago, I was in Austin, Texas. I visited a jail there. I will be visiting one in Rome at the end of the month. And the availability of drugs is always an issue, always in any correctional facility I've visited around the world.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley.
Chair, can I just say quickly, if he needed someone to go to that Rome penitentiary, that might be willing to attend that. I'm just saying. Yeah. Maybe learn a little,
Yeah.
We can carry your bags. It'll be fine. Mr. Nur Mohammed, please go ahead. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Zinger and Madame Miron. You were talking about the ingenuity of some of these individuals in terms of getting drugs into the prisons, and I actually want to point out that Mr. McGregor and I had a visit on a very hot 40-degree summer day in Vancouver, or outside of Vancouver, to Kent. And the staff there actually told us about drones, people trying to use drones. This would be interesting to Mr. Shipley, that despite whatever the prison guards were trying to do, folks were trying to use drones to drop drugs, and the staff there successfully interdicted them. So we appreciate, I think, that it's quite a difficult task to keep these things out. One of the things that you mentioned was actually something that, again, I don't want to speak for Mr. McGregor, that both of us, I think, were struck by, was issues related to nutrition and food. And the fact that cuts were made, a number of your policy changes were made under previous governments, and that is not to cast aspersion on previous governments, that's what we were told. that made it impossible for local prisons to access locally sourced food and things that would be more inexpensive, but were forced kind of into a model of this is the food you must serve on this day and it must come from a central facility, which of course led to nutrition issues, which led to some of the other challenges that you've talked about. You know, one of the things that struck me was the impact of the poor conditions in what we saw, as well as these types of factors on staff morale, staff's ability to do their jobs well, and the concerns that they actually had about the well-being of the prisoners, so that they would be able to actually improve and hopefully one day enter society. When we talk about things like dry cells, when we talk about issues like mental health supports, in your estimation, what are some of the things that you have seen that have, of course, been mandated by the Minister on CSE and others, that are some of the easy wins that we should really be focusing on and looking at to ensure that these conditions improve in prisons, not just for prisoners, but also by extension for staff and hopefully by extension for better outcomes on reentry?
Well, let me just go back, because I want to make sure that proactively I'm not getting into trouble. I am going to Rome, but all the expenses will be paid by the International Development Law Organization. So this is not, and to provide actually legal training on human rights and develop material that has been sponsored by the Department of Justice, the American Department of Justice of all people. Yeah. So exactly, what are you looking for? Like in terms of your question, are you sort of on the food thing, or
no? There's a list. I mean, there's a list of things that the minister has asked the CSE to do. There's obviously a list of issues that you've identified. You've identified food. You've identified mental health. You've identified a number of these different challenges. What would be, I think, good for me and I suppose others to know who have been in these places to at least take a look, but not to stay, thankfully, is what are the things that are easy, some of the easiest steps that CSE could be taking to address that they perhaps have not? I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah. So, well, let me start with some of the number one complaints that we receive and how things haven't really moved on those things. And those two are food and inmate pay. So, again, inmate pay was set in 1981. That's more than 40 years ago. It hasn't been indexed ever since. And only a very few amount of people get the top rate of $6.90 per day.
Sorry,
why is
just to
inmate pay important?
Just to clarify, so what would be really good, I think, for us to clarify, because there will be people out there that say, oh, they're in prison, why should they get paid? Can you explain in that context why this is actually important?
Well, because the strategy of the service is unfortunately, because of some of it is not in their control, is to leave the inmate population in complete destitution, state of destitution. And so they cannot get ahead. And if you cannot get ahead because you can't get enough pay to purchase canteen items, to make your stay a little bit more comfortable, maybe to buy gifts to your family or save some money for when you're going to be released from prison, then you end up in an underground economy that is very harmful, where basically people will do anything they can to get ahead, including sexual violence and coercion, including drug trade and bullying and all sorts of things. So inmate pay is really important. And and that's all, it's not a good message. If I tell you as members of parliament, would it be acceptable that your pay be set at in 1981 and not have been increased ever since, despite inflation, despite everything? You would say that's not fair. That's not okay. But why is it okay for those who are incarcerated? So And food is so that's
Sorry,
a
sir, I have to cut
really
you off here.
core. Can I little food, a little, or should I? Okay,
Very, very quickly.
okay. Food is also really important because the food is so unappealing. Most now complement their diet with canteen, and the canteen look like your local IGA or Metro or Sobeys. They sell protein there. They sell chicken. They sell pizza. They sell all sorts of food. And they don't no longer institution cook for 100% of their residents. They cook for about 70% because they know that people will not eat all the food. So otherwise, it'll be wasted.
Merci, monsieur. On va maintenant à Madame Michaud, 2 minutes et demie.
Thank you very much. Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. I'll actually give you an opportunity to keep talking about this particular issue. When we went to Porte-Cartier, we had an opportunity to meet with a committee of inmates, I think that's the term, and they spoke to us about the issues they were facing, and that inmate pay arose again as an issue, and you were referring to it. You were saying, that the cost of living has increased for everyone, and it also actually affects people in penitentiaries. We were looking at a little table by the canteen, and the cost of a sandwich was, I think, exorbitant if you compare it with the amount they can make working. Of course, I could have many questions on so many aspects of this year's report, but that touched me particularly so, and I sent a letter to the commissioner and the minister because it hasn't evolved over years. Have you issued recommendations to that effect? Because you have some to make with respect to this issue. Yes, we've documented the problem with the inmate pay, and this is something we've done for years and years. Clearly, it's politically difficult. I accept that. And I think that's why correctional services, despite that, could be more innovative in trying to address that problem by making sure that they improve their purchasing power, even if that $6.90 salary is not changed. In other words, there are many deductions on this $6.90. It's actually only 10% of the prison population who has the maximum amount. If you kind of get rid of some of those deductions, if you subsidize or reduce the cost of items that they can buy, that might improve things. There are a host of strategies that could be utilized, like making some items free instead of having inmates be forced to buy them. Things as simple as toothpaste, soap, aspirin, any kind of personal care product. I think that if we did change that pay, we could greatly improve things, and the service hasn't done that. To me, that's a very small amount of money in a huge $3 billion budget. And in terms of money, in terms of food, it's less than $6 per day. That's an amount that's really far, far below the standard. And you were referring to Porte-Cartier. That's one of the institutions where the food is the best in the country. They were able to, because they're somewhat outside of urban centers, they were able to find a way to improve the menu. And one of the things they did was to make their own bread, actually. And they do. Thank you, sir.
Very good answers, but very long. Appreciate it, though. Mr. McGregor, please, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I just want to make a quick comment on the food issue. I mean, that visit to Kent Institution with Mr. Nur Mohammed was a real eye-opener, and made me feel glad that I had a visitor's badge attached walking through those gates. But I mean, just incredible. Both those institutions, Mountain and Kent, are in Agassiz, BC, surrounded by the most fertile farmland that British Columbia has to offer. And it's just incredible that we're not pumping up the local economy and buying local food. And I know from in a previous life, I was a tree planter. I did it for 8 years. And the quality of the food served in camp has a huge impact on morale. And if it's not good, you can have a mutiny. So I just want to underline that fact that having good quality food can be such a huge boost to morale and to overall behavior. It's really incredible. Dr. Zinger, the $3 billion budget, you said with that kind of money, we should have world-class results. And it's obvious we're not. And I'm just incredibly frustrated because we just keep on talking about the Correctional Service of Canada, but the buck stops with the Minister of Public Safety. And our job as legislators is not only to look at the authorizing legislation, the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, but we also have to hold the Ministry of Public Safety accountable. And so I guess my very basic question to you is, what can we as opposition members of Parliament do to help you out? I mean, do you need legislative change? Do you need the minister to take a more forceful role? Because ultimately the Correctional Service of Canada is answerable to the minister who holds his position by confidence in the House of Commons.
Well, that's a tough one and a loaded one, but the fact remains is the Corrections and Conditional Release Act dates back now to 1992. It was introduced by the Mulroney government. It was actually a very good piece of legislation that breeds charter right protection, administrative law principles, but it's been eroded over the years, and actually, under the Harper government, it was also further eroded. It's 30 years old. I don't think it's. I think it needs a revamped. My office actually did as part of our frustration when the Trudeau government introduced new legislation. It took about 3 times on trying to address the administrative segregation issue. Without consultation. It was just out of frustration, my office actually produced what Correctional and Conditional Release Act 2.0 would look like if you would start with fresh principles that are consistent with what we know best in corrections. So yes, a legislation change would be certainly welcome. The problem with the approach on solitary confinement was that it was in response to class action lawsuits, and it was very narrow, trying to address that. And it didn't ask the tough question as why so many people end up in segregation. So maybe it's because you don't have very good access to mental health. Maybe it's because you're getting in trouble because inmate pay is too low, because food is so bad that you need to do all sorts of things to. So all these things would have could be addressed well beyond just the narrow view of solitary.
Merci. We'll go now to Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd, go ahead, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Zinger. I met with advocates who deal with fetal alcohol syndrome, and they were very disappointed at the lack of support from the federal government and various level of governments. There's currently one program that's about $1.5 million a year. But they noted that, as you noted, that a large proportion of the prison population struggles with fetal alcohol syndrome. Are there any programs in prisons to deal with fetal alcohol syndrome, and what more can be done to hopefully reduce the amount of people with fetal alcohol syndrome committing crimes and thus ending up in Canadian prison?
Well, I've mentioned on my profile that studies conducted by the service shows that anywhere between 10% up to 23% meet the criteria, so either have symptoms or the diagnosis for FASD. What I find outrageous is that despite the fact that that's the prevalence rate is so high, the service does not have a systematic way of assessing people and providing treatment and therapy to help those individuals and provide the necessary support. And the support goes during incarceration, but also beyond. There's got to be able to, these are life issues that need support, and not enough is done. And I'll just leave it to that.
No, thank you for that. Very good point. I've always found, in case studies in other countries that faith-based programming, Indigenous spirituality programming, can have a tremendous impact on changing people's lives and reducing recidivism and increasing better outcomes for everyone. What is the state of this kind of faith-based programming in Canadian prisons, and is there room to expand that further?
Let me turn it to Hazel to talk a little bit about the services that are being provided to Indigenous prisoners, culturally relevant and spiritual services, maybe with respect to elders and so on. Hazel?
From my experience and in traveling around the institutions, like the faith-based and cultural perspective is very crucial to the Indigenous population, because a lot of the fellows that are now coming into prisons, they don't really know about their culture, but once they make that connection, they are better prepared there's better outcomes for them when they connect with the culture and they meet with the elders and do more Indigenous programming. And the programming that are successful are the ones that are coming from an authentic Indigenous perspective. And that's something that CSE needs to be mindful of and to continue, or at least bring those types of programs into the institutions.
Is there enough of this programming? Is this something that's lacking?
Currently, they have a one-size-fits-all program, which is not conducive to other cultures. And the cultural perspective, in my opinion, is not taken into consideration. The only way things are going to be effective is if you have that perspective. And what's happening, the way I find out information is I actually go and talk to the inmates and ask them, well, how can we help you? And there's not enough people that do that to go and see them and sit down with them and say, how can we make prison life more better for you? And at least I do that with the people that I go and visit. They want to see more of us. They want to see more people. The staffing with Indigenous issues, there's not enough Indigenous staff.
What about other programs other than Indigenous, like Islamic or Christian or other groups as well?
It's probably sort of the same.
It's lacking. Okay.
But they need that. They need that cultural perspective in order to reach people.
I have limited time, so my final question is, something we've been studying with public safety
Actually,
over
Mr.
and over
Dane,
again.
you've got 12 seconds.
Okay, organized crime. How do we disrupt organized crime in our prisons?
12 seconds.
Well, yeah, so it's a real issue. Gangs and organized crimes are real concerns. I would like to, lead and talk perhaps about one of the systemic investigation that we did this past year on black prisoners who are overly identified as gang members with a great deal of detrimental impact on them. Sometimes it's unclear as to how they were provided the label, because the label carries a very heavy is very heavy in consequences, and what we've also noticed is that there's that gang lens towards black prisoners that anyone, even if not affiliated or labeled by the Correctional Services of Canada officially as a gang member or a significant threat in their assessment, they are treated the same way. And that's a real problem.
Merci, monsieur. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. We'll go now to Mr. Chang. Mr. Chang, go ahead. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today with us, and thank you for imparting your knowledge. In regards to discrimination, I was glad to hear that your office was encouraged by the Prime Minister's mandate letter to the Minister of Public Safety, calling for him to address systemic racism in the criminal justice system, including federal corrections. How can the Government of Canada ensure that we get this right moving forward to address systemic human rights concerns in federal corrections?
Well, thank you for your question. And yes, there's. I'm not completely jaded all the way through the core. I do have hope, and I am hopeful that there are two particular initiatives that are led by the Department of Justice and the Minister of Justice that I think offer some hope. If rolled out appropriately, of course. One is that strategy on Indigenous criminal justice. And there's also another strategy that involves Canadians of African descent and the justice system. Both those initiatives, they are justice-led, but it's clear that the Minister of Public Safety has a role to play in them as well. My fear is always when something is justice-led that they will only focus on what they know, which is the courts and sentencing and these kinds of issues. So what I've recommended this year in my annual report is to make sure that corrections becomes a significant part of that overall strategy. Don't forget corrections. It certainly has enough money, and there's lots of stuff you could do to address some of those issues. Dealing specifically, if I had 4 groups, segments that I think need reforms, I would say, of course, Indigenous corrections. I would also look at those who are significantly mentally ill, or suicidal or chronically self-harm. And then I would also look at women as well, and the aging population, which in my view, many of them don't have, there is no reason to keep them in penitentiaries as they are not a threat to society.
Thank you, Dr. Zinger. But in regards to these recommendations, has there been any progress addressing these discriminations in our correction systems?
Well, I can tell you that I'm very disappointed with the response of the Correctional Services of Canada with respect to recommendations I've made for over a decade when it comes to Indigenous people in our report, Spirit Matters, as well as the report that we did on the experiences of black individuals incarcerated in federal corrections, which also dates back 2013. I'm appalled that it's not just me who made the recommendations, but my recommendations have been rolled into the work of the UN special, the UN Working Group on Expert on People of African Descent, who cut and paste some of the same kind of recommendations that I've made before. That was in 2016, and yet very little has been done. What I notice, the trap with Correctional Services of Canada is that they seem to be very good at producing a lot of corporate documents, but it doesn't filter down to the penitentiary floor, if you want, and effect change. The latest flurry of activity wasn't in response to my recommendations, but to the Prime Minister's directions that every single government department should have an anti-racism strategy. So there was a flurry of activity, but it still doesn't seem to had any impact on how people are treated in our penitentiaries. They are still subject to a pervasive discrimination, biases, racism, and that's very unfortunate.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. We go now, that ends our second round. We'll start our third round with Mr. Motz. Mr. Motz, please go ahead, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dr. Zinger, my last iteration on public safety, we had conversations about corrections as well. And I noticed in your summary that you have some new issues you're facing, one of them being medical assistance in dying, and that's one of the new challenges facing corrections. The rest of your report, however, doesn't make much mention of that practice. So an access to information and privacy request revealed that as of August of 2020, a total of 11 individuals in Correctional Services Canada's custody had made requests for medical assistance in dying, of which 3 were granted. Now, this fiscal year, how many incarcerated people sought medical assistance in dying, and how many incarcerated people received medical assistance in dying? Can you tell us those numbers, sir?
The answer is no. And I will tell you that I'm quite upset about it. When new legislation is being proposed, I was asked to testify, and I provided some, I thought, very thoughtful and important changes that needed to be done. And one of them is that the Correctional Service of Canada has no obligation, statutory obligation, to inform my office of somebody either requested or having had the procedure of MAID done. I think that is inappropriate. So that's one thing that I'm a little upset about. The second one is the most obvious one, is that some of the procedures have been conducted inside penitentiaries, and I think that is ethically wrong. Canada is becoming the only country in the world that sanctions MAID in a correctional facility. I think it's extraordinary. Correction should not be in the business of shortening the life of individual under their roof. It should be done in an outside hospital. So I've mentioned that as well. And those are small little changes that I think would be important. And the third one is that corrections does not do any mortality review when it comes to MAID. And for me, it should. And it should. Why? Because there are questions that are important, not just in terms of ensuring that MAID procedure was appropriate, but questions about whether the health care that was provided to that person was up to snuff and did not accelerate the request for MAID, for example. Or was there everything that was done to trying to transfer the person outside the penitentiary so that they could make a decision which is much more informed and free of constraint in the community before requesting MAID. So this should be subject to investigations.
And I think beyond what you have indicated, and I certainly understand the frustration you have with that, I'm wondering, though, and I know you don't know the answer to this, and this is more of a statement, the concern of the slippery slope that MAID has become, where we know across this country leading up to the review last fall that there are those who seek MAID and have received medical assistance in dying from mental health challenges, not imminent death, for which there is no cure. And I suspect in our correctional services, that would even be more of a challenge. And unfortunately, with some extension of this and a year-long extension to even start considering MAID for those who are experiencing mental health challenges, we are the only country in the world who would even consider such a move. And it's troubling. And I think it's going to be troubling for you and correction services moving forward. Just changing gears a bit, sir, you have, and last time you were here, we talked about this. I think Ms. Damoff remembers these conversations we had. You have stated in your summary that you've provided us, supported by the numbers, that Black and Indigenous individuals, are overrepresented in Canada's correctional system. Can you given your current role and the experience you have on this matter, why is that occurring? Like, can you explain this overrepresentation of these groups in corrections?
I'm going to turn it to Hazel to give you a better answer than my answer. My answer will be more as a human rights lawyer. What I can tell you is that in Canadian society, Indigenous people as well as Canadians of African descent do not benefit from the same socio-economic, cultural rights and political rights as other Canadians. And there's a slew of reasons why that is the case. And I will turn to Hazel to provide you with a better answer in terms of the deep-rooted issues where history has resulted in those situation where they're not benefiting from those rights that certainly you and I, as aging white men, do benefit from.
Madame Miron, if you can make it a quick answer, where Mr. Shipley's well over time.
So the overrepresentation in the institutions right now is due to the lack of the willingness or the desire to have the Indigenous or the Black population to move into medium and minimum. And our healing lodges, most of them are sitting empty as well because there's that control factor that CSC seems to have on these people, and they don't want to cascade them down to a proper security level. We have a massive amount of Black and Indigenous fellows in medium facilities, and mostly the less desirable institutions like Saspen, Stony Mountain. So you'll find the majority of the inmates there are Indigenous, and they're just being warehoused there because they're not being moved to a medium facility. And
Thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off there. It was Mr. Motz whose time's up, not Mr. Shipley. Anyway, time's up. So we go now to Madame Damoff, please.
Thank you, Chair. So little time here. So I want to talk about gangs and I want to talk about geriatric inmates. So just really quickly on this one, does CSC have a national gang strategy? And should they? I know that the framework to reduce recidivism mentioned gangs, but given the prevalence of gangs in the institutions, I wondered if you could just really quickly comment on that.
We've been calling for the service to have a national gang strategy. And also specific initiative for de-affiliation of gangs. And so far, we haven't been able to convince the service of the benefit of having such a overall strategy and initiatives. We've documented some of the concerns we had with respect to younger prisoners. We did a systemic investigation on those age 18 to 21, and it was clear that they are they're fearful for their lives when they're coming into the penitentiaries, and they are proactively seeking gang membership for protection, and the cost associated with that is tremendous on those individuals, and it perpetuates a problem.
Thank you, Dr. Zinger. Just before I go on to geriatric inmates, when I was at Grand Valley, I did see the prison needle exchange program, and I spoke to the nurse there. And it's been extremely successful, and my understanding is there have been no incidents. I acknowledge the fear that exists in those institutions that don't have it, and certainly at the institution, there were stickers all over opposed to it. But when I spoke to the nurse and the people actually administering it, there had not been any issues in the institution. So your report talks about the average age being 45 to 50, and all of us sitting in this room think to ourselves, that's not very old. But the fact is, I had an awakening when I went to Millhaven, Dr. Zinger, when I saw an inmate and a group of inmates who I thought were in their 80s and could have been at a table in a long-term care home, and found out they're younger than I am. The horrible food, which it's difficult for Canadians to just understand how bad the food is, the conditions of confinement, lack of physical activity, means these inmates are aging much faster than the general population. Do you think that there would be benefit for a continuum of care by developing partnerships in the community for these inmates who are not posing a risk to society to be in long-term care homes or some kind of long-term care facility?
Yeah, so the age that we use is 50, and that's to recognize that people who are incarcerated because the long history of mental illness, of addiction issues, and the life of crime actually ages prematurely the body. So you can add a factor of chronological of 10 years to their age in terms of their health. I don't know what to tell you. It's a growing number, and it's clear to me that other jurisdictions have been able to release those individuals in the community safely and at a lot less cost. Keeping a person aging and dying in a prison costs Canadians 2 to 4 times the average cost of incarceration, which is that $225,000 that I mentioned at the beginning. Outrageously expensive. And if it could be done by not competing with the, I think that's the key, not competing, because that's what the service tells me, is that, if we're trying to transfer that person out, there's no bed space, there's no long-term care facility bed space, there's no retirement home where we can send them. So if the service, given the level of resource, could actually create a bed space, like the state of, for example, Connecticut, they actually went to the private sector and say, build us some long-term care facilities. And the cost is way cheaper. It doesn't cost $225 or 2 to 4 times that to keep an aging parent in a retirement home or a long-term care facility. So there's huge savings to be made. It is more humane, more dignified, and it makes no sense. There are about 50 to 60 people who died in penitentiary every year, the average age being 62. It's crazy. 2/3 of these individuals are natural causes, and the vast majority are predictable deaths. People who get chronic diseases and they become terminally ill and palliative and terminally ill, and they die in prison. There's absolutely no reason why these individuals shouldn't be managing the last few months or a year of their lives in a penitentiary. We ask, when we did our aging systemic investigation on aging, we ask prisoners, and we interview a lot of them, over 200, and they all told us the last thing the most fear is to die in prison. And the service, even with MAID, tells us, oh no, we're doing it in prison because, it's what they want. They don't want this. And it's inappropriate, it's expensive, and I think we could do better. And given that it's a a slowly growing number of our penitentiary population, we should be much more proactive. And if legislation could help, for example, in terms of medical releases or geriatric releases, to force the end of the service to do the right thing, then please do it.
Merci. Thank you, Ms. Demoff. C'est maintenant Madame Michaud.
Madame Michaud, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to once again thank you. It's really interesting. Thank you to the colleagues who've been covering so many different subjects. It's really a great learning opportunity. I'd like to learn a little bit more about the experience of Black people in these penitentiaries. You've made a number of recommendations in this report. You refer to racial prejudice, very present. You're talking about the availability of services and then the availability of do-rags, which is an accessory that certain Black people would use to protect their hair. So there's also testimony from witnesses, from people who's sort of testimony from some who say that when they receive services from a person who looks like them, a Black person, they get better service. They feel like they trust the person more. Can you give us a bit more of an indication about your recommendations to that effect? Yes, we issued a number of recommendations in that section of our annual report, which I think was well received. I was really quite encouraged by the fact that a Supreme Court decision cited our most recent report stating that a young Black man, given what's happening in correctional services and the discrimination he's experienced in receiving those services, that actually would be a source of a disproportionate effect, and that the minimum sentence should not be imposed. To me, it's clear. Correctional services does not prioritize skincare products for individuals who are Black, who have different challenges than white individuals would. He also said that these do-rags are considered to be related to gang activity. The services reaction has been positive, actually, on those two fronts, and we were happy about that. I think the recommendation we issued, which was perhaps the most significant, was to develop, I'm sorry, I don't really believe in this, but to develop a national strategy that's detailed and would really change things in the ways in which Black people are treated within the federal system. I don't really believe in it. I mean, I often criticize, actually, the kind of corporate document, this type of document. But for my office, it's important because my office's role is to ensure consistency and compliance with the law and with policies. If there are no policies in place, it's very difficult for me to make correctional services accountable, and that's why I made the recommendation. And the recommendation affects a number of different relates to a number of different areas that could make a difference, a real difference for those who are incarcerated that are Black. Thank you.
Mr. McGregor, please, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Zinger, one of my other committees is the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying, and we are going to be releasing our final report next week. But we actually did have a witness, Dr. Jessica Shaw, who appeared before our committee to talk about MAID in prisons. And I just want to quote from her testimony, quote, "What we informally call compassionate release is actually called parole by exception, and being granted parole by exception in Canada is exceedingly rare. In 2 of the 3 known MAID cases for patients in CSC custody, the prisoners had applied for and been denied parole. The 3rd prisoner didn't apply. Apparently, he knew that his prospects for release were minimal, even considering his advanced stages of illness. And she went on to say that Canada is the only jurisdiction in the world where assisted dying is legal, who does not have specific guidelines about how it ought to be implemented for prisoners. So I guess at a basic level, I don't have a lot of time here, but like, what would you like to see in those guidelines? I just want you to expand a little bit more, because this is obviously a pressing issue. And could you also maybe talk about track 2, because that's people who do not have a naturally foreseeable death, but they are suffering from a grievous and irremediable condition. What do you know much about that population in Canada's federal institutions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so no, I concur with what Dr. Shaw has mentioned, and I suspect that some of the stories comes directly from what we were able to gather. So the problem, as I said, is threefold. There's got to be an obligation, statutory obligation, to refer the cases so that we become aware, my office become aware. There need to be oversight in this business. The second one is that the service must investigate like they do for every single death dealing with a person who is incarcerated. And then there should be a clear prohibition that the procedures should not happen in penitentiaries, period. No ifs and buts, and it should not happen. What I think is really important to stress in a prison situation is to try to be extremely proactive and get the people who are palliative, terminally ill, have chronic diseases where death is just a question of time, to get them outside the penitentiary so they can make the decision there without the fear of dying in prison, and the coercion that can be either perceived or real. So I think that's my wish. With respect to the I guess the phase 2 or the expansion of it, given the high prevalence of people with significant mental illness who live in conditions of confinement that, especially some of the very people who are severely mentally ill, to give them a way out of prison with death because they're struggling with mental illness and are in such poor conditions of confinement. I can tell you that people with mental illness in corrections tend to be housed in higher security institution, maximum security. They're overrepresented in those structured intervention units, which is the new regime of administrative segregation. So absolutely, you should have added oversight and some rigor if you're going to expand it, because of it's not only that they're suffering and they want the suffering to end, possibly, but it's also because the added suffering because of the conditions of confinement may taint their so absolutely this should be done very thoughtfully.
Merci. We'll go now to the last two slots in our questions. We're going to cut them back down to 4 minutes. So, Mr. Shipley, please go ahead, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And Doctor, I enjoyed our last exchange. I found that beneficial. I learned some. But I want to follow up on one of those, and I want to move on. I don't want to get caught up where we were. You had mentioned in our last exchange that one of the programs that could be enhanced in the institutions is the employment program might help. In my research, we found that 60% of maximum security prisoners are employed, but almost half the positions are cleaning jobs. And notably at one institution, the Edmonton institution, 80% are cleaning jobs. While there's absolutely nothing wrong with custodial work, it would be probably nice to have a bit of a variety in options. And I know many times lately I've met with many trade organizations where there's a huge deficit in people looking to get into that roles. Is there anything being led towards expanding on the employment training in the facilities that could help integrate once they're released back into society?
Yeah, so the most of the jobs in penitentiaries have very little value. It's in terms of vocational skills. So in terms of most of it is cleaning, kitchen work is with the new cook chill doesn't really isn't really that great of skills to acquire. The best program that the service has is called CORCAN. It's that prison industry program, but it touches only less than 10% of the carceral population, and 80% of that is in the textile. So they're basically using sewing machines, skills that may provide some. I guess it's better than idling in your cell. May provide some legitimate skills in terms of making sure that you show up at work on time, but it doesn't have transferable skills in Canadian job market. We're not big on sewing in Canada on jobs with respect to sewing bed sheets or underwear or cheap jeans. So we got to do better. CORCAN, however, has pockets involving typically a handful of individuals that are very good. And that are working with the private sector, and sometimes they can even, depending on if they have work releases, they can actually go to those sites. But it involves so few individuals, and this is the biggest challenge I think for the service, is trying to expand those and make it so much more accessible. Because right now it's only the benefit of a few, and those few typically already have skills. so they're making they're benefiting from vocational training, but they already have the training and the rigor.
And thank you for that. And sorry to interrupt. I just have one last question because I'm out of time here. This has been on my mind since I read this, and if we touched on it earlier, excuse me for missing it, but you've mentioned a lot about what the official costs are for a yearly. In one of the documents you gave us on page 2, you mentioned that it's the latest official costs are $126,000 for federal custody for men and $222,000 for federal custody for women. Why is it so much more, $100,000 more for the women?
Well, it's just economy of scale. So we only have about 600 incarcerated women across Canada in 5 different institutions across the nation. So a lot of it has to do, you're still going to need a lot of staff, and it's much more cost efficient to have a single institution with lots of people than to have 5. But we choose 5 back in 2000, and rightfully so, to ensure that the women would be closer to their community. So it's only by and large an issue of economy of scale.
Thank you. We go now to Mr. Chang for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again to our witnesses for being here this morning. In regards to black overrepresentation, your recommendation throughout your report, you call for various national action plan, policy developments, and reviews. However, you also note that much of the action already taken by the government to address ongoing issues, such as racism, for example, have resulted in little more than your court policy exercise that have little direct impact on the lives of incarcerated black person. How then do we reconcile these findings to implement effective change?
It's an excellent, it does raise the question. My view is that we need a great deal of involvement of Black community leaders and organization to assist the service. And there are so many barriers to access the carceral population to provide services, advice, that I think that is where you would be able to effect change. Let them in, let them provide programming, let them provide counseling, cultural initiatives, music, arts, get them into penitentiaries, get the community to walk in penitentiaries and assist them. I think, and also guide them in those policies so that they are truly policies that have that African Canadian lens to them, so that the initiatives resonate with them, that they are culturally appropriate. And at the same time, do all the other things that you should do, which is, about ensuring that the staff representation at all level of the organization is much more diverse and responsive to the culture.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zinger. These recommendations that you just made, are they being implemented anyway, or it's just on the shelf sitting somewhere collecting dust?
Well, I think I told you that I was disappointed with the overall response of the service, and I will leave it to that. There's a few things that are a little bit more responsive. I mentioned the on the healthcare products and stuff. They're also on the health. We made some comments about maybe health professionals working for the service need to be a little bit aware of some of the cultural issues, and they've responded quite appropriately and proactively. So there's I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to praise when the responsive are constructive and meaningful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zinger, and I'm glad that some things are being done to help our correctional population, and hopefully we have positive, moving forward, we get positive response and positive work done. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. And absolutely, thank you, Dr. Zinger and Madame Miron, for being here with us today. It's pretty clear that you have a great deal of wisdom and guidance to offer us. Thank you for your fortitude in hanging in here for 2 full hours, although it's kind of also clear that we could probably make use of you for a lot longer than that as well. So thank you for your time, and thank you for the committee for all of your work today. I remind the committee that the Russia study has been released, or released internally, and hopefully we can, if there's no issues with it, we can pass that on Tuesday at the end of our witness testimony. So that being the case, we are now adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.